The war on paper is real. Wizards and Hasbro are dumping D&D print for the virtual tabletop. Hello, this is Robert Romano with comicsgate.org. Hit that subscribe button. Today, I wanted to go through the situation at Hasbro. They're experiencing layoffs right now. 1,100 people have been laid off, and it's hit the Wizards of the Coast particularly hard. Wizards of the Coast is a subsidiary of Hasbro, publicly traded company. And it's so therefore hitting D&D producers and employees and those who were working on Magic the Gathering as well. And this situation, it's not new news, but I did want to go through it. This is typically what you see at the end of business cycles. Inflation will tend to overheat the economy. Consumers will max out their credit cards. They'll have less money to spend. And then consumer purchases will drop. And then layoffs will follow. Unemployment will rise. As the inflation rate cools off, unemployment tends to rise. This happens at the end of business cycles. Sometimes it results in recessions. And I think that's where we're headed. But 2024, everyone keeps moving forward the date of like, oh, when's unemployment going to really tick up? 2024, the Federal Reserve is projecting it should go up, about 600,000, 700,000 jobs lost in the coming year. Now, with the mega recessions that we had both in 2008, 2009, and then again in 2020 with the economic lockdowns related to COVID, seeing far fewer jobs lost might have people saying, is that even a recession? It's like, well, normally we don't have great depressions or great recessions every time there's a fall of the economy or a slowdown. So, but whether there's a slowdown or a recession doesn't particularly matter. We are seeing the layoffs now coming towards the end of what we think is the business cycle here. Hasbro's 1,100 layoffs. This is from PCGamer.com a couple of weeks ago, have hit D&D and Magic the Gathering hard as a growing list of staff announced their departures. Now, this is about the war on paper. You're saying, what's this got to do with the war on paper? These are hitting the print portions of Hasbro's portfolio as it relates to Wizards of the Coast. D&D is traditionally a tabletop game, the Magic the Gathering the same. And so if you're seeing layoffs come in the print division, it could hint at what I consider to be the war on paper. But let's get through the layoffs first. Earlier this week, Hasbro announced that it would be laying off approximately 1,100 employees 2 weeks before Christmas, as per an internal memo. At the time, I pointed out that the memo announced, quote, the majority of the notifications will happen over the next 6 months, with the balance occurring over the next year. While it doesn't directly contradict this statement, many layoffs are happening right now. And so this is written by Harvey Randall. So he had some exclusive information at the time. A list of layoffs at Wizards of the Coast continues to grow. Some have been substantiated via announcements on social media, while others are being still verified. Mike Merles, a co-designer of D&D 5th edition, is potentially among their number, as per a Blue Sky screenshot shared on Twitter. Mike Merles says, yes, I was laid off by Wizards of the Coast. Yes, I am doing fine and excited by what's to come. And yes, I have a pretty amazing circle of friends. I'm going to take a nap and then get back to the work of forging the future. Merles had left Wizards of the Coast RPG design team and had been working on the design team for Magic the Gathering. This has been further substantiated by a growing list at EN World, as well as one being assembled by tabletop journalist Christian Kaufer on Twitter. While the full scope of the layoffs is still being verified, I've collected what statements I can from impacted employees. Among the list of confirmed layoffs is art director Brianna Heiss, a senior developmental editor, Aiton Bernstein, producer and host Amy Dallin, the game designer Dan Dillon, product manager Natalie Egan, senior communications manager Larry Frum, and Magic the Gathering community manager Jesse Hill. So here's a collection of those statements. One reportedly impacted employee who has not yet made a statement on social media I can find is head of publishing and licensing, Liz Shu. If verified, this will mark the end of a position she has held for over 28 years, according to her LinkedIn profile. I've reached out to Wizards of the Coast, who are, quote, not sharing, commenting on breakdowns on geography or teams out of respect for employees. Despite asking, I did not receive a comment on what support employees will be receiving beyond being sent a further memo. It's still unclear whether, quote, comprehensive packages, including job placement support, quote, close quote, will support the impacted employees through the holiday season. In the memo itself, Hasbro CEO Chris Cox, who received a $9 million in compensation in addition to his $1.5 million salary last year, said the layoffs are intended to, quote, modernize our organization and get even leaner, calling them, quote, a lever we must pull to keep Hasbro healthy. Cox has not announced any cuts to his pay or compensation to achieve these goals. During an investor meeting in October, thanks Dicebreaker, Cox noted that both Magic the Gathering and D&D were having, quote, record years, stating, quote, Wizards of the Coast and digital gaming revenue increased 40% behind strong contributions from Baldur's Gate 3, Monopoly Go, and Magic the Gathering. So keep in mind, there you go, digital gaming revenue. Could they be moving from the print products to digital? I will make that case. I don't have any insider information. I'm just going to go on publicly available information and reporting, and you can decide for yourself if that's where we are. Is this a war on paper? While the wider health of Hasbro as a company is another thing entirely, it's stunning that despite these major successes, Wizards of the Coast is losing so many key staff with the potential for more redundancies over the next 6 months. Okay, so that's the end of that story. And this, I think, definitely made waves in kind of the geek world and gaming and other types of products. So you're at the end of the business cycle. The economy overheats. People max out their credit cards. Consumer spending goes down. Layoffs ensue. But how are they transitioning? And who is this impacting? Now, here's a new round of layoffs at Hasbro impacts Wizards of the Coast. The CEO staff memo. So there was actually the full Chris Cox memo is here. Team, a year ago, we laid out our strategy to focus on building fewer, bigger, better brands and began the process of transforming Hasbro. Since then, we've had some important wins like retooling our supply chain, improving our inventory position, lowering costs, and reinvesting over $200 million back into the business while growing share across many of our categories. But the market headwinds we anticipated have proven to be stronger and more persistent than planned. While we're confident in the future of Hasbro, the current environment demands that we do more, even if these choices are some of the hardest we have to make. Today, we are announcing additional headcount reductions. I think that's corporate tease for layoffs and firings as part of our previously communicated strategic transformation affecting approximately 1,100 colleagues globally, in addition to roughly 800 reductions already taken. So we have 1,100 plus 800. So really, it's 1,900 layoffs so far. Our leadership team came to this difficult decision after much deliberation. We recognize this is heavy news that affects the livelihoods of our friends and colleagues. Our focus is communicating with each of you transparently and supporting you through this period of change. I want to start by addressing why we're doing this. Why now? Why now? We entered 2023 expecting a year of change, including significant updates to our leadership team structure and scope of operations. We anticipated the first 3 quarters to be challenging, particularly in toys, where the market is coming off historic pandemic-driven highs. While we have made some important progress across our organization, the headwinds we saw through the first 9 months of the year have continued into holiday and are likely to persist into 2024. To position Hasbro for growth, we must make sure our foundation is solid and profitable. To do this, we need to modernize our organization and get even leaner. While we see workforce reductions as a last resort, given the state of our business, it's a lever we must pull to keep Hasbro healthy. So what do they mean by getting leaner? What do we mean by modernization? Well, I think it means, first, here's the list of employees. I did want to get, kind of further establish that this is in the print area. D&D designer, graphic designer, creations relations, art director, senior development editor, D&D Beyond producer host, senior communications manager, lead developer for the 5e, and then also designer on Magic the Gathering, game designer on Magic the Gathering, talent manager, D&D art manager. A lot of these are in the print area. Some of them D&D Beyond is going to be online stuff as well. But then we have DM, the creator of DM's Guild, We have the licensing and publishing manager, the community manager, another art director, also an associate systems administrator, senior data scientist, analytics engineer, technical producer, director of Magic the Gathering Universe, Beyond Creative and Production, a program manager, a D&D Beyond director, and a senior software engineer. So not just, there's some physical media there. There's also some digital media there. But I do think that this is going to impact greatly upon print. And the reason I think that is because a year ago, more than a year ago, August of 2022, this was on Polygon when they were releasing the new edition. They're starting to release information as they proceed to the 6th edition for Dungeons and Dragons. It's going to be called 1D&D, includes a new virtual tabletop and digital book bundles. And at the time, the first playtest was becoming available, and more information's become available since then. In April of 2023, we have this screenrant.com about D&D's virtual tabletop. Everything you need to know about 1D&D's virtual tabletop. For players and dungeon masters alike, it's hard not to be impressed with D&D's upcoming virtual tabletop. Here's everything that is known so far. An all-new D&D gameplay experience is going to be coming in the next year or two to Wizards of the Coast is revealing some footage of this D&D virtual tabletop that is currently in development and will be compatible with the upcoming evolving 1D&D rules, as well as the existing 5th edition. And this is written by, let's see here, Carrie Lambertson. Okay. This new virtual space for campaigns is being developed to help players who are facing the problem of getting friends together in the same physical space to play D&D. Though the project is still far from completion, the initial demonstrations are impressive. Wizards of the Coast showed footage of this new VTT in action during a recent D&D Direct live stream event. The video showed a little bit about how players will be able to connect their virtual minis with a D&D Beyond account character sheet to make the experience more convenient. The artwork and even dice rolling are designed to look as real as possible and operates by using Unreal Engine behind the scenes. So you can see some screenshots here of what it's going to look like. You're going to be able to play online. You know, it's kind of like getting into a Zoom call and then playing with other people online, which with modern technology makes a whole lot of sense. It also means that you don't need as much paper as used to. You can do it all virtually. Other companies have been providing virtual D&D tabletop experiences for players, but this will be the first official VTT that is being put out by D&D Beyond and Wizards of the Coast. Game director Cale Stutzman stated in a D&D Beyond blog post that throughout development, the team has concentrated on 3 major focuses. Quote, this experience needed to satisfy the 3 core criteria. It had to be fun, like playing in person. It had to be convenient, both for DMs and players, and it had to be authentic to the rules and how people play the game. Using these keywords as our North Star, we started work on an immersive experience while trying to solve the real-world problems our players were having with learning how to play, connecting with each other, and keeping their groups alive. Features that D&D's tabletop will offer players. Here's another screenshot of the VTT. In recent years, it has become increasingly difficult to get groups together in the same room on a regular basis for events such as D&D. Virtual tabletops are designed to help give another prospect when physical proximity may not be practical. Making more immersive environments for players around the world to come together in an online space could help players enjoy the game more often with more flexibility of options. These are some of the benefits that D&D's VTT experience is going to be featuring according to D&D Beyond. Players can interact with a 3D space with multiple tools, minis, dice, and chat functions. So you have the tools, the minis, and the dice. Those are physical products that you typically get, so you don't need as much physical products anymore. You can do this virtually. DMs can have full control over putting monsters into the world, assigning stats to minis, adjusting hit points on conditions, and more. Less paper there. Rolling dice should feel like a fun experience, but the math behind those rolls will be automatically calculated unless players choose an option to manually handle it. Character sheets in D&D Beyond will connect with the VTT, so players' minis on the virtual board will have the spells, weapons, and stats connected to them. Character sheets don't need paper and pencil with that anymore. You can do it virtually. There are 3D maps. Oops, well, they're going to be 3D maps. I guess we don't need maps anymore. We can do that virtually, designed especially for the VTT, and also ways for DMs to import 2D maps to play on within the VTT. The VTT will include visual effects and animations that mirror what players are trying to do with casting spells or other visual aspects of the world. And it will be 5e compatible. So they are they were doing 1D&D. They're going to do the upgrade with the rules with the 6th edition, or what would have been the 6th edition. They're calling it 1D&D. And then they're going to also now feature 5e compatibility. While the VTT was originally announced to be in development for the new 1D&D rule set changes, this has been changed to now also feature 5e compatibility. The entirety of the player's handbook and monster manual are being built into the VTT system. Visual effects with spells and abilities by monsters and NPCs will all be designed to work with this virtual experience. Having the rules built into the background of the system will also allow DMs and players to focus more on the story and adventure and less on looking up certain rules to make sure they're being used correctly. Let's see, here's a screenshot for connecting to D&D Beyond. Allows easy access for the character stats. So again, you don't need paper for that. Let's see what else we got here. Here's what I guess one of the digital D&D versus traditional D&D. This is what the digital version is going to look like. Looks like a computer game, which is cool. I like computer games. And in fact, that's how I played D&D when in the 1980s via the SSI games. I'm not against digital games, but I am kind of interested in this, war on paper. Is there really a war on paper? So there's more screenshots there. Currently, D&D's VTT is in its pre-alpha development. There is still a lot of work that developers need to do before it will be ready to be launched to the public. Later in 2023, the VTT should be slowly opening up for some playtesting experiences, but the full release will most likely be mid to late 2024 at the earliest. All that has been shown so far is simply a small representation of what the teams will be continuing to work on in the future. So this is the future of D&D, the future of development. They're jettisoning the print people and the art directors and the editors and the writers, the designers, and they're going to go to developers. You're going to need more people who are doing software and that sort of thing. Even this small snippet of a preview is very impressive. The virtual tabletop could prove a very useful tool to help new players feel more comfortable trying out D&D. With the rules pre-built into the system, and it will assist groups in being able to get around logistical hurdles in scheduling and locations. This new development will hopefully be yet another tool in the toolbox for DMs and players to get to experience the joys of Dungeons and Dragons. So there you go. D&D's VTT is the future of D&D. Now, what are they trying to avoid? In my opinion, they want to get rid of this. There used to be tons of paper supplements put out in the old days under TSR. So they want to avoid this, player's handbook, DM guide. Maybe those will still be offered, but they don't really offer unit sales for these print products. That's kind of typical in publishing. You're not going to, like in the 1980s, they were moving millions of these, players' handbooks, Dungeon Master Guide, and certainly, there were all these smaller supplements, and those were not moving millions of copies per se. But what were the novels, the Dragonlance novels by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, the Forgotten Realms novels. Those were very successful. They also used a lot of paper. And so this was the old days in the 1970s and 1980s and the 1990s, before Wizards bought out TSR when it went into bankruptcy. There was a paper boom and, both with games and everything else in the 1990s, comics, and then the bubble popped towards the end of the 1990s. And then TSR was going bankrupt. And then they needed to be bailed out. Wizards of the Coast, which had the successful Magic the Gathering, purchased TSR, and then Hasbro eventually purchases Wizards. And so now it's a Wizards thing. So, but I think that they're trying to get rid of this and all these paper products that we loved in the past. And, here's a bunch of more of them, a few campaign supplements, the box set campaign settings. They're not available anymore. You can't get a Forgotten Realms box set. You can find them on eBay, but they don't offer those. Not since before the 3rd edition were these box sets really available. So it's been a long time since those. And then just a huge abundance of campaign supplements, which were, a real art in my opinion. And then what came after it was really, getting leaner and leaner and leaner. But yeah, I don't think they want this anymore. And what makes me confident of that, I think, is what Hasbro is putting out there. This is the most recent third quarter of 2023 financial results. And you'll see this category right here, Wizards of the Coast digital gaming net revenues by category. So it goes from September 25, 2022 to October 1, 2023, but it says quarter ended. So a year ago, tabletop gaming was $246 million. And then in 2023, it was $290 million. So it increased by 18%. Whereas digital and licensed gaming increased from 57.2 million to 133.1 million, over 100% increase in their digital and licensed gaming assets there. And a large part of that is the success of Baldur's Gate 3, we noted in the other article there. So the growth potential in Wizards and Hasbro's mind has to be digital. They say this is where we're going to make the most money and we can reduce the most overhead. I think that's what they mean by getting leaner and modernizing. Now, why would they do this? Is it, again, in the 1980s, you could move millions of these paper products. Do they want to move millions of paper products anymore? And I say, no, they don't want to do that because there is a war on paper. This is a Reuters report from July of 2023. And so, yeah, Reuters. More firms report on deforestation, yet few have planned to stop it, CDP says. Who's the CDP? Let's see here. London, Reuters, July 6th. Number of companies reporting on their management of deforestation risk has risen 300% over the last 5 years. Yet most have no plan in place to stop it. Environmental disclosure platform CDP said on Thursday. Over half of the world's economic output is moderately or highly dependent on nature and its services, the World Economic Forum has said. And in December, a landmark deal to protect and preserve it was agreed in Montreal. So here's an analysis about this. What this links to analysis. UN nature deal could help wildlife as long as countries deliver. By Gloria Dickey. Let's see here. A new conservation deal adopted this week at the UN summit in Montreal puts the world on a strong track to halt the rapid decline in nature, but only if wealthy nations deliver enough funding and all countries prioritize conservation. Goals set out in the agreement known as the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework include halting species extinctions, conserving 30% of the world's land and sea by 2030, and mobilizing $200 billion per year for conservation. So if we look at the part about deforestation, here's Brian O'Donnell, Executive Director of Nonprofit Campaign for Nature. Quote, safeguarding the Amazon, the Congo Basin forests, peatlands, mangroves, and reefs globally will require some major increases in funding. He also said, political leaders are just beginning to recognize how big a priority biodiversity should be on their agendas and in their budgets, he said. At COP15, the three biggest rainforest nations, Brazil, Congo, and Indonesia, worked together in the final hours to reach consensus on the deal. The three just last month had announced a new partnership to cooperate on forest preservation. Such an alliance holds great potential, says Anders Hag Larsen of Rainforest Foundation Norway. Quote, with the agreement giving priority to the most biodiversity-rich areas, implicitly rainforest protection will be at the core of its implementation. So there's definitely a push. You see the UN, and we see other factors that will now. How does that relate to what corporations are doing? Well, Hasbro has ESG reports. These are environmental, social, and governance reports that many companies are putting out now. And under a new Securities and Exchange Commission rule by the Biden administration, will be required to disclose. You have a carbon disclosure rule. You're going to have environmental impacts, which now with the ESG push in investing, There's what's known as greenwashing, where companies will say that they're really green, but they're not really living up to the word. Or so the SEC says, so the Biden administration says. So they're going to regulate it and make sure that companies that are disclosing that they're really environmental friendly are actually living up to their word. So it becomes kind of like a carbon credit score, except it's going to be the SEC that's going to be imposing upon the publicly traded companies in order to enforce ESG and to make sure that it's happening. Don't just pay lip service to it, actually do it. So Hasbro is a company that publishes these reports. Here's a 2021 report. Here's a 2022 report. And we can look at the 2022 report, how Hasbro reports on ESG. Let's see, can we zoom in a little? Yeah, we can zoom in a little there. Okay, biodiversity and ecological impacts. So Hasbro says it wants to manage the impact of our operations, quote, products and services on the natural environment and ecosystems that may occur through land use, sourcing, and extraction, including biodiversity loss, habitat destruction, and deforestation. They also have things for waste, reduce the quantity, type, and quality of waste generated as a consequence of production of our products and services. Also, product design and life cycle management. Manage and improve the life cycle of all products and services for consumers and the planet. The planet's a stakeholder in this case. This is stakeholder capitalism. So you go with who the stakeholders are. In this case, the environment's a stakeholder, including the impacts of materials, innovation, packaging, distribution, and end use. Material sourcing. Continue to improve the ingredients of our products, complying with applicable laws and regulations when sourcing materials and incorporating the use of recycled and renewable materials where necessary. There's also the greenhouse gas emissions, climate change, resilience. So there's going to be some other factors that they consider there. But for a game, games, board games company like Hasbro, of action figures, company like Hasbro, if they're making plastic, they're going to be using lots of oil. That's going to have a carbon impact. But here we're talking about the war on paper. I think the war on paper is real. I think ESG is, kind of one of the ways they do that. And we've also noticed some of the social aspects of the diversity, equity, and inclusion. Support all people by promoting, creating, advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion across the workplace and business. DEI has been huge, particularly recently. We see these hearings on Capitol Hill with Harvard, MIT, and some of these other Ivy League private universities that use DEI in its hiring practices. I've noted in the past this violates, in my view, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, because you're not supposed to hire on the basis of race or gender. It's supposed to be merit-based. That's what federal law says. But leaving that aside, it's just something to keep in mind that the ESG, the environmental side of this, can also have impacts upon hobbies, media that you like, whether it's gaming, comics, or something else. Now there's also one other mention of deforestation in this, a paper and forest procurement policy by Hasbro. And when you click on that, you learn what Hasbro has to say about this specific issue. Quote, forest-derived materials responsible sourcing policy. Quote, Hasbro is committed to the sustainable and responsible use of paper and forest-derived materials with minimal impact on forests and forest habitats. This policy is intended to ensure that Hasbro's procurement decisions align with our commitment to the protection of endangered forests, sustainable forest management, and biodiversity, climate change mitigation, the well-being of indigenous communities, and respect for workers and human rights. Supplier requirements, certification. Hasbro expects its suppliers to prioritize recycled forest products. To the extent virgin forest products must be utilized, they must be credibly certified by FSC, PEFC, or SFI. Other credible certifications and verified sources will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. FSC disassociated sources are prohibited regardless of certification from other bodies. Traceability. Suppliers are required to trace forest product sources to at least to the country of origin and eventually to the level of its forest management unit. If supplier is using sourcing wood products from areas determined to be high risk for illegal forest management practices and trade, third-party verification of legality, including credible certification, shall be obtained. chain of custody. You have to have a chain of custody. If credibly certified forest products are not available as an interim measure, suppliers must maintain chain of custody documentation of the origin of forest products and must continue to do so until credibly certified supplies are developed. We've reserved the right at any time to request verification of legality. Note, this only applies to the virgin content of the product and not to the recycled content portion. Compliance with laws. Hasbro expects all suppliers of forest products to demonstrate compliance with all applicable international and national legal requirements for forest management, harvest, manufacturing, and trade. Hasbro commitments. Annual traceability. Hasbro will conduct annual traceability of suppliers' forest products to evaluate compliance with this policy, including a breakdown of sustainable materials and forest country risk assessment. Hasbro will use the results to identify high conservation value areas and ensure credible certification or other verified sources demonstrate responsible forest management. We're almost through this. Supplier monitoring. Hasbro will validate sustainable paper and wood sources through internal monitoring of suppliers and compliance documentation, chain of custody audits, and random testing of paper products from high-risk regions to ensure compliance with policy requirements. If a supplier is not in compliance with any applicable provisions of this policy, Hasbro will take appropriate corrective action to address such noncompliance up to and including termination. And finally, forest restoration. Hasbro will support initiatives to protect and restore natural ecosystems such as tree planting and regenerative agriculture in order to contribute to global reforestation efforts. Now, as you might expect, this is going to, if you have a global war on paper, what would you expect to see happen? Like when green activists, if they take over, like an oil company like Exxon, it's not because they want to sell more oil, it's they want to reduce oil production. And so what happens when you do that? The price of oil goes up, as it did in 2022, hit record highs, and Exxon had record profits. You restrict the supply of something, the price goes up, and then you make record profits either way. And you would expect the price of paper to skyrocket, just as it has since 2020. It is up by over 26%. This is a producer price index by commodity, pulp and paper, and allied products paper. Let's see if we can zoom in on that a little. There we go. You see it a little bit better here. Now you can also see how this would impact other media, not just gaming, not just D&D, not just Hasbro and kind of board games or something like that. It's also, things like comic books. If there's a war on paper, it's going to impact the comics industry. Now we can actually edit this graph and show what the percent change from a year ago is like. And so I say it's up by 26% since beginning of, since 2020 when the market was down. And it's a volatile commodity. Commodities are volatile, but over time, the price is increasing. And at its peak, you had it up 17% year over year in January of 2022. So that was the annual increase at that point. So if you go from January 2021 to January 2022, it was up 17%. I note it's been up over 26% since 2020. And so if you are say you were crowdfunding something in 2020, and then you want to go and you source that, you said, oh, how much does it cost for printing? I bet you the price of printing went up to at least a little bit since 2020 at the time of the crowdfunding. So this is just the overall growth of the producer price index for paper products. And so if you're trying to restrict the production of paper, the cost of paper is going to go up. And so if you're a company, you might want to mitigate, that by moving into virtual tabletops. If you're Hasbro, Wizards of the Coast, and you want to do D&D, it's like, let's just do it online. We're not going to be able to do too much more paper anymore, which is a real shame. I think that this was a real art form. I think that, maybe that's why TSR went out of business, was they were flooding the market, they overprinted. If you're printing in advance, that could be a big problem. If you see a sudden shortfall in revenue and sales, things like crowdfunding might actually make a lot of sense in this regard, where you can gauge demand prior to going to print. And I think that indie creators, whether it's in gaming or things like comic books, they're going to have to really pay attention to the cost of paper going forward, because I think the war on paper is real. I think that the ESG, whether it's via Hasbro or other companies, you see, it's like, oh, this should be harming their bottom line if they're attacking their core products. And the answer is they haven't posted a loss at Hasbro annually, quarterly. This is macrotrends.net. So if you want to see a consolidated, what are the gross profits of a company, from their corporate filings, go to macrotrends.net and you can look up any company you want, whether it's Hasbro, Disney, or somebody else. Gross profit for the past 12 months ending September 30, 2023 was $3.7 billion. Now that's an 11.9% decline from the prior year, when it was $3.94 billion in 2022, which was a 12% decline from $4.49 billion in 2021, which was a 19% increase from 2020. But they still raked in $4.5 billion in 2020, $3.9 billion. These are profits. $1 billion in 2021, $3.7 billion in 2020. I'm sorry. So you have $4.5 billion in 2021, $3.9 billion in 2022, $3.7 billion in profits in 2023. So the company, regardless of a decline in how much profits they're having, is still quite profitable. They're raking in billions of dollars, and moving away from paper might temporarily be hurting, customers who were accustomed to coming in to find the paper products. They see less supplements available for gaming. For example, I noted that the novels aren't really there anymore, other than licensing R.A. Salvatore to keep on writing Drizzt novels, and then Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman to keep going with Dragonlance. The D&D brand of novels is long gone. The box set campaign settings, those are long gone. So it used to see a lot more paper products coming out of TSR and then Wizards, but much less so today. So as you transition to a digital market, can you maintain profitability? I say, yeah, of course you can. But that means that the war on paper is quite real. But what do you do if you're Wizards, you're Hasbro, and then you're trying to reduce the amount of paper products, but you have a competition in the RPG sector that may want to continue making print products, but you want to reduce the harm to the environment, et cetera, and promote your virtual tabletop? What could you do about that? Well, as you will recall, about a year ago, Wizards of the Coast was going to deauthorize the open game license 1.0A, and they were going to replace it with the 1.1. They were going to say, this is no 1.0A. You've been making products for over 20 years under the open game license that is compatible with, at that time, 3rd edition, and then eventually 5th edition D&D. So you're not going to be allowed to do that anymore. We're just going to end the old license. And so they were actually targeting their competition, what they perceived to be their competition, via a new onerous open game license 1.1. Now they backed off of that, but at the time they were going to go for things that said that you can't do anything that was discriminatory or harmful. You will not use any content or works covered by the open game license for any harmful, discriminatory, illegal, obscene, or harassing purposes. Let's see, you will not do anything that harms our reputation. And then if you did do those things, if they just said you're racist or you're harmful or your products are discriminatory in some way, then you could actually have your open game license terminated. If you infringe or misuse our intellectual property, so they wanted to make it more like the D20 system trademark license. Which was something I had published under back in the early 2000s in my 20s. I only got one book done. I wasn't a particularly good publisher, but it was a great experience, and might have advised my decision to leave art school and pursue other things. I ended up going for political science. In any event, you could, under the OGL 1.1, they were going to be able to terminate your license if you breach any other term or condition of this agreement and it's not cured. If you bring any action challenge in the license content, and then you could terminate it. Now, this was a draft version of the 1.1 and had comments included, and it said, quote, "We know this may come off as strong, but this is important. If you attempt to use the OGL as a basis to release blatantly racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, bigoted, or otherwise discriminatory content, or do anything we think triggers these provisions, your content is no longer licensed." So they could just come in, wave a magic wand, and say, "You're a racist, you're a bigot, you're homophobic," or whatever, and then they could just kind of control the marketplace and reduce the number of people who were willing to continue publishing open game licensed content, and then kind of corner exclusive market there. Now, the open gaming license was preserved. There was petitions put out there by one of the co-authors of the OGL, Ryan Dancy, that were very effective, and I signed that petition. I know a lot of you did, but they were contemplating a way to reduce, in my opinion, the amount of third-party content, and yeah, that would reduce the amount of paper products out there. Now, a lot of companies are going to try to say, we're not going to even use the OGL anymore. We're not going to use the Creative Commons. We're not going to use 5e anymore. We're going to try to release our own rule systems, and try to compete with Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro. And we'll see how successful that is going forward in this new environment, as D&D is going to be moving to the virtual tabletop. Could the paper products, could they continue to eat up market share in the RPGs? I think that remains to be seen. Or are players still looking for a way to play D&D and therefore are going to opt into the virtual tabletops, and then the pen and paper version of role-playing games will just basically go the way of the dinosaurs. I mean, fortunately, you can still get a lot of this stuff on eBay. This is actually a screenshot from somebody's product offering on eBay. You can just go and just find these old paper products. They're still out there. Maybe they should be preserved in museums. Put them into kind of whatever you can to reduce the wear and tear on the paper. But I think that the paper products are definitely going away, and that's a real shame. But you could say, oh, that's where the market's going. But I think it's kind of artificially driven. I think it's regulatorily being driven by the SEC to reduce carbon impacts via the climate disclosure rule and things like that. And so again, the war on paper is real, and virtual tabletop might be a bit of evidence. And many of these public statements and the layoffs in the print divisions might also be a part of that. And so again, it's Robert Romano with comicsgate.org. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications. We have a comment here before we go. Improbi says, not a war on paper, more like a war on people owning products that companies cannot own outright. So yeah, it's a push for digital. You can force people to pay subscriptions, and they can increase profitability that way. I'm not saying they're going to lose money. I've just noted a bunch of charts that say they're going to make money either way. But I do think it's a war on paper. I think their own public disclosures are showing that they want to move away from paper products in general. I think that for industries like comic books, where customers actually prefer paper products, the paper versions of that, the war on paper could be quite devastating. And it remains to be seen. But if they could sell more comics with digital, I think they would have proven it by now. But the paper still is by and large the biggest part of the market share there, and there's not really an appetite for non-paper things like comic books. And so that's going to be particularly harmful. So what if you were committed to reducing paper products at these publishing houses? Maybe you would just put out really bad content that fans really don't like. Maybe you would issue statements that denigrate existing fan bases and call them names and say that they're racist, so that the sales go down, and then you tank the industries for these old paper products and legacy products, and you don't create a new generation. You could probably hire Rob Liefeld to run Marvel and recover Marvel's market share, and instead have millions and millions of paper comic books moving out every single month. But that would probably go against their statements against deforestation, which they'll naturally be including in their ESG reports as well. I'm talking about gaming here, though. I think Hasbro is very unique company in that they have lots of physical products made of oil and trees. And they want to stop using oil and trees. And so what does that mean going forward is that we're going to see less physical goods. We're going to see, yes, more digital goods that the companies can then force you to pay subscriptions for. There's certainly a profit motive there, but there was also a profit motive to sell millions and millions and millions of paper products as well. You can make profits in the paper trade. Just don't overprint and blow your entire budget on it. Again, it's Robert Romano with comicsgate.org. Hit that subscribe button, ring a bell for notifications, and have a good evening. Take care.